Hey everybody, what's going on? It's Cameron, aka the Salty Googan, and if you want to learn how to catch muskie, stick around. You're not going to want to miss this. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about jigs, bass jigs, musky jigs, and why you should be using them to catch big muskie in your local musky waters. So anytime musky fish is brought up, people probably think of big baits like 10 to 14 inch baits like pounders, the 16-ounce rubber baits that are like 2 feet long, Medusas, Mag Dogs, stuff like that, big spinner baits. But a lot of times people don't think about the more subtle presentations, the more natural presentations, such as a jig. Now what I'm talking about when I say jig is something like this. Now this is actually a 6 Sense brand jig. I believe that's a hybrid jig. I'm kind of partial to their brand. But when I say jig, I'm talking about something, a hook with a metal head, a brush guard right there, a skirt, and then it's got room on that hook to leave trailers on like this. Now that's just a black and blue and green pumpkin creature bait. Looks like a crawfish there. But there's also bigger versions of jigs that are actually made for muskie. Now here in Moorhead, Kentucky, close to Cave Run Lake, my local muskie shop, I'm really good friends with the owner, Matt Blackburn. He runs Crash's Landing. I got the hat and the sweatshirt. He makes these for me. That's just the Esox Magnum jig head, I believe that's what it's called. It's got a flat bottom on it, so it can sit straight on the bottom, and you can really crawl this across the bottom, and when it sits still, it just sits straight on the bottom, straight up like that. But he'll tie whatever skirt I want on there and put whatever creature bait on the bottom for a trailer. But sometimes I just ask for the jig heads, and I get creative. That's just like a mullet bait that I have. I fish Florida a lot, saltwater a lot, and I got creative, and that just looks like a big bait fish on that jig. But it's, that's probably a 5 or 6/0 hook at least, and just a heavy jig, kind of made for bigger fish, aka muskie around here. Now a lot of times when people think of muskie fishing, they think of throwing giant baits, baits called pounders. They're 16 ounces of rubber and they're like 2 feet long, and it kills your shoulder to throw them for 30 minutes. We're talking giant spinner baits, glide baits, stuff like that. But not a lot of people think to throw smaller baits when it comes to muskie fishing. And I'm telling you, jigs are a huge producer of muskie, and I always have been ever since I've started muskie fishing. Even before I started muskie fishing, muskie were always trying to grab my bass jig from me in the rivers, lakes, and creeks. So highly effective bait. Let's jump right into why I think they're effective and how you can use them. Now, why are jigs so effective? Well, one theory I have is they're natural looking. So what looks more natural to you? A crawdad that you can fish in all parts of the water column, or this? Now, I'm not saying this is a bad bait. Plenty of muskie are caught on baits like that every year. But in heavily pressured waters and heavily pressured times of the year, a lot of times muskie are gonna shy away from baits that they've seen a million times, because the 60 boats that are on the lake are all throwing spinner baits like I just showed you, and stuff that honestly, if a muskie thinks something's up with it, or if it's a big smart muskie, they got that way. They got big and smart for a reason, turning down baits that don't look natural. But if they see all those baits and they're kind of like, man, I'm hungry and I didn't get to eat today, and then you throw something like this that looks like an actual crawdad, something they really do eat, and pull that along really slowly in front of their face, and it acts just like it should, like a real crawdad should, my opinion, that muskie's gonna eat that turned away from 10 other baits. Another reason I think jigs are so effective is because you can fish them all day and not be near as fatigued as throwing big baits. Here, I'm out of my sling right now, but I literally just had shoulder surgery, and the first baits I'm probably gonna pick up are to start fishing next year is gonna be a jig, just because it's a lot less stress on tossing and reeling in all day versus just kind of slowly fishing that jig on the bottom and kind of feeling for that hit And the nice thing about jigs is that they catch a lot of bass too. So if it's a really slow day, at least you catch something, right? Another reason I think jigs are so effective is because you can fish them however you want to. If it's super cold and it's a really, really slow time of year, you can fish them super slow on the bottom. If you know the water's really, really cold and the fish are being really sluggish, or you can bunny hop them on or near the bottom, or you can swim them through any part of the water column you want, or you can bunny hop them, kind of yo-yo it, however you want to, and you can still do a figure eight. You can still do anything you can with a big bait, but it's just a lot more versatile, in my opinion, than a lot of baits that are just solely destined for, you know, top water baits or swim baits or like dive and rise baits. Now, what's a big reason that you as a musky fisherman, specifically you as a beginner musky fisherman, if that's who I'm talking to right now, what's a big reason you want to use bass jigs? They're cheap. These jig heads don't cost, you know, we're looking at, let's say you're gonna buy a quality low to mid-range musky bait. You're looking at 20 to 40 bucks, okay? This right here, I believe was under 10 bucks. I can't remember, so I don't wanna give an exact price, but you can buy bass jigs for $3 and $4. Sometimes if you catch them on sale, you catch them for like $2 or $3. And a lot of times when you're first getting into musky fishing, I don't know about you all, but I didn't have a lot of money. Bass jigs were a very easy way to ensure that I still had money for other things and not break the bank. Now, one thing that I love about jigs and jig fishing for muskie is that they keep a fish pinned when you hook it. Very rarely are you gonna lose a muskie from the hook popping out when you catch one. And the good thing about it is when you catch a muskie on a jig, a lot of times they're gonna be, I wanna say, 80% of the time, they're gonna be hooked right here, right in the top of the lip. People have this, you know, fear that the muskie's gonna inhale the jig because it's so small. A lot of times when you're fishing with jigs, you're so in tune to your lure because you're literally pulling it across the bottom or skipping it over logs that you're gonna feel every little tick, every little bite. And when that fish bites, it's usually gonna be a solid thump, and then you set the hook, and when you set the hook, that jig comes right out of their mouth, hooks them right here in the top. Now, what kind of gear do you need to fish with jigs? Now, a lot of my bass jigs, I use bass size gear. The only real thing I'm doing is I'm making sure that my braid isn't going below 20-pound test, and on a lot of my bass gear, I use 30-pound test just because I run into so many muskie. But you need a heavier rod, so like a heavy fast action, something that's gonna set a single large hook through a very bony mouth. If you have a very limber rod, it's gonna be hard to take that giant hook point and drive it into their mouth. For instance, on something like this, I'm using a musky rod for a musky jig, and I'm using at least a medium heavy fast, if not a heavy fast rod, just so I can drive that hook home. But on something like this, I'm using a heavy fast bass rod, just because number one, the hook, and number two, you're also moving that weight, that jig head. And if you got like a 3/16 ounce to an ounce jig, you want a rod to be able to make that hook penetrate the fish's mouth. But at the same time, you don't want to use like an extra heavy fast rod like you would for big rubber baits or something like that when you're musky fishing, because it's too much. You're gonna pull that jig right out of their mouth, and it's gonna be a lot heavier of a rod, in my opinion, not as sensitive. And it's just, those big rods aren't designed for throwing these tiny baits. You wanna be able to actually throw these baits a good distance as well, and be able to take up a good amount of line with them. And you can't set the hook as fast with a giant rod on a small bait as you can with a little bit lighter rod. So like I said, I like the 6 Sense baits. I use their hybrid jigs a lot, but you can use, there's all kinds of jigs, and to a point, they all serve the same purpose. They've got a jig head, a hook, a skirt, and you can put a trailer on them. And some are designed to be like swam over cover. Some of them are designed to be punched through cover. Some of them are designed to be, you know, not get caught in rocks. But for the most part, if I'm fishing logs, I'm just using a hybrid jig, or just like a regular regular jig. Doesn't have to be a football head or anything, just because I want to be able to fish anything I come across. But in any jig, I advise you to find one that has a very stout hook, like a 2X size hook, something that's not a thin wire hook, but like a rigid hook. You're gonna bend hooks out when you set that hook on a muskie, or it's gonna bend and it's gonna pull it out, like straighten it out if the hook is too thin. So like I was talking about before, you can fish jigs however you want to. Myself, I like to find what the fish are reacting on. Sometimes you'll pull in a jig and a muskie will follow it in like it's following in a regular muskie bait. It'll be hot on the tail and you're just like, oh man, and you try to figure eight or yo-yo it at the boat. But oftentimes I'll start on the bottom, okay? Throw out the jig, let it sink. Sometimes they'll pick it up right there as soon as it hits the water. But you just kind of lift it up and kind of crawl it on the bottom. And every now and then you can, kind of jerk it up off the bottom, let it go up and down. It looks like, a bait fish feeding on bottom, or, like a shad swimming around the logs, or it looks like a crawdad or crawfish, whatever you want to call them, crawling and kicking off the bottom just like that. If they're not responding to that, then try swimming it on the bottom. If they're not responding to that, swim it through the top or the middle of the water column. If they're not responding to that, do like a yo-yo. Just reel, and your bait's going up probably 5 or 6 feet, just like that through the water column. Find what the fish are responding to, and you'll find a bite. Now, one thing to remember when you're fishing jigs is to be patient. I forget what fisherman said this, but I think it was Bill Dance. But anyways, they said the most important tool in your tackle box is confidence. You need patience and confidence to fish a jig. Once you catch a fish, a muskie on a jig, you're gonna be like, oh my God, this is the best thing ever. It's exactly like fishing for bass with a jig, but you're waiting on that thump. And when you feel that thump and you set the hook, it's a lot bigger of a fish and it's so much fun. But you have to be patient. And just like if you're bass fishing with a jig, if anything feels off, you feel your bait or line swimming, or you feel a bite, because a lot of times they don't thump it that hard, they'll thump it just like a bass. If anything feels off, set the hook. So in this video, we've talked about jigs, what they are, why I think they work, how to fish them, what gear you use, and just a general overall mental attitude towards jigs. I promise you, if you pick up jigs for muskie fishing, you won't be disappointed, and it might be, I know it is mine, it might be your new favorite way to catch muskie. Anyways, guys and gals, I appreciate you tuning in this video. If you like this video, click that little thumbs up down below. And if you haven't already done so, please click that subscribe button. That way you can stay tuned to all the fishing action that's coming to my channel. I've got this and much more, so go check it out. And until next time, keep fishing.